In the shadow of London's most secretive building, where state secrets are born and die, a single moment was about to rewrite the rules of international espionage. What happened when an ordinary security guard witnessed an extraordinary meeting would soon send shockwaves through intelligence agencies across 3 continents. This is not a story of fiction. This is not a tale spun from imagination. This is the true account of William Hartley, a man whose life changed forever on a rainy Tuesday morning in March 2023, when he accidentally stumbled upon a conversation that governments around the world had spent billions trying to keep hidden. The guard who saw it happen thought it was just another routine day at Thames House. He had no idea he was about to become the most wanted man in the intelligence community, or that his simple observation would expose a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of power. Some secrets are meant to stay buried. Some meetings are never supposed to happen. And some witnesses are never supposed to survive to tell their story. But William Hartley did survive. And now, for the first time, the world will learn what really happened when a chance encounter in the corridors of MI5 revealed a truth so dangerous. 3 governments tried to erase it from existence. William Hartley never imagined his life would become the subject of international headlines. At 42 years old, he was the kind of man who blended into crowds without effort. Average height, thinning brown hair, and wire-rimmed glasses that he constantly adjusted when nervous. He had worked as a security consultant for 15 years, moving between corporate buildings and government facilities with the quiet competence of someone who understood that his job was to be invisible until needed. The morning of March 14th, 2023, started like any other Tuesday for William. He arrived at Thames House, the imposing headquarters of MI5, at precisely 7:30 in the morning. The building itself was a fortress of secrets, its Art Deco facade hiding some of Britain's most classified operations. William had been contracted to review their internal security protocols, a routine assignment that had brought him to this legendary address for the past 3 weeks. He badged in through the main entrance, nodding to the familiar faces of the permanent security staff. Sarah Collins, the head of building security, greeted him with her usual professional smile. She was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind, someone who had climbed through the ranks of intelligence security over 2 decades. The assignment itself was straightforward. William's company, Meridian Security Solutions, had been hired to conduct a comprehensive review of Thames House's physical security measures. It was the kind of work that required careful observation, detailed documentation, and absolute discretion. Every corridor, every access point, every potential vulnerability needed to be cataloged and analyzed. What made this particular contract unusual was the level of access William had been granted. Unlike most external consultants who were restricted to public areas, he had been given clearance to examine security measures throughout the building. This level of trust was rare, and William understood the weight of responsibility that came with it. His daily routine had become predictable. Morning briefings with Sarah Collins, systematic walkthroughs of different building sections, detailed note-taking, and afternoon reports. The work was meticulous, but not particularly exciting. Most of his observations involved outdated camera placements, inefficient badge reader locations, and minor protocol improvements. But on this particular Tuesday, something was different. William noticed it immediately when he entered the building. There was an unusual tension in the air, a subtle shift in the behavior of the permanent staff. Conversations stopped more abruptly when he approached. Security personnel moved with heightened alertness. Even Sarah Collins seemed more reserved than usual during their morning briefing. During the briefing, Sarah mentioned that certain areas of the building would be temporarily restricted due to high-level meetings taking place throughout the day. This wasn't uncommon. MI5 regularly hosted sensitive discussions that required additional security measures. What struck William as odd was the specific nature of these restrictions. Entire floors were being sealed off, far more extensive than anything he had witnessed during his previous weeks at Thames House. As William began his morning walkthrough, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was happening. The building's atmosphere reminded him of a theater just before the curtain rises on an important performance. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for something to begin. His first stop was the third floor, where he had been documenting camera coverage in the administrative corridors. As he worked, making notes about blind spots and positioning angles, he became aware of increased foot traffic in areas that were usually quiet. Men and women in expensive suits moved through the hallways with purpose, their conversations conducted in hushed tones that stopped entirely whenever they noticed his presence. By mid-morning, William had completed his review of the third floor and was preparing to move to the fourth. As he gathered his equipment and notes, he noticed a commotion near the main elevator banks. A small group of security personnel had assembled, creating what appeared to be an impromptu checkpoint. Anyone wanting to access the upper floors was being subjected to additional screening, even personnel with high-level clearances. This level of security theater intrigued William from a professional perspective. Whatever was happening in the building today was clearly important enough to warrant extraordinary measures. As someone whose job involved understanding security protocols, he found himself naturally curious about the procedures being implemented. The fourth floor presented an entirely different atmosphere. The usual buzz of activity had been replaced by an almost cathedral-like quiet. Most offices appeared empty, and the few personnel William encountered moved with deliberate caution. It was here that he noticed something that would later prove to be crucial to understanding the day's events. At the eastern end of the fourth floor corridor, two men in dark suits stood stationed outside a conference room that William had previously cataloged as rarely used. These weren't regular MI5 security personnel. Their bearing, their equipment, and their obvious alertness marked them as protection specialists of the highest caliber, the kind of men assigned to guard only the most important individuals. William's professional training kicked in automatically. Part of his security assessment involved understanding traffic patterns and identifying potential vulnerabilities in high-security situations. From his position near a maintenance alcove, he had a clear line of sight to the conference room entrance while remaining essentially invisible to the guards. As he made notes about camera angles and sight lines, William began to piece together what might be happening. The extraordinary security measures, the building-wide restrictions, and the presence of elite protection officers all pointed to one conclusion. Someone extremely important was meeting in that conference room. Someone whose presence required the kind of security normally reserved for heads of state. The morning wore on, and William continued his methodical documentation of the fourth floor. He had learned long ago that the key to effective security consulting was patience and observation. Rushing through assessments led to missed details, and in the world of intelligence, missed details could have catastrophic consequences. It was during his lunch break that William first saw him, the man who would later be identified as the focal point of the day's extraordinary security measures. William was sitting in a small break area on the fourth floor, reviewing his morning notes while eating a sandwich when movement in the corridor caught his attention. A small procession was making its way toward the conference room. At its center walked a man William didn't recognize, but whose importance was unmistakable. He was in his early 60s, with silver hair and the kind of bearing that suggested decades of wielding significant authority. His suit was impeccably tailored, and he moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. Flanking him were 4 security personnel, their eyes constantly scanning for potential threats. Behind them walked 2 women in professional attire, one carrying a leather briefcase that never left her grip, the other speaking quietly into a secure communication device. The entire group moved with the choreographed precision of people who had done this many times before. As they approached the conference room, William observed something that made his professional instincts sharpen. The level of deference shown to this unknown visitor by the MI5 personnel was extraordinary. Even Sarah Collins, who William had come to respect as someone who commanded authority within Thames House, stood at attention as the group passed. The conference room door opened, and William caught a glimpse of the interior. The room had been transformed from its usual sparse setup into what appeared to be a high-level briefing center. Multiple screens had been installed, secure communication equipment was visible, and several people were already seated around an expanded conference table. But it was what happened next that would change everything. As the important visitor was about to enter the conference room, he paused and turned back toward the corridor. For just a moment, his eyes met William's across the distance. It was a brief exchange, lasting no more than 2 or 3 seconds. But in that moment, William saw something that chilled him to the bone. Recognition. The man recognized him, though William was absolutely certain they had never met before. More disturbing still was the expression that crossed the visitor's face. It wasn't surprise or confusion. It was calculation. The look of someone rapidly assessing a potential problem and determining how to handle it. The moment passed, and the visitor entered the conference room. The door closed with the solid thud of reinforced security hardware, and the corridor returned to its previous quiet. But William's mind was racing. How could a man he had never seen before recognize him? What possible reason could there be for that look of cold assessment? As the afternoon progressed, William found it increasingly difficult to concentrate on his security review. The brief encounter had unsettled him in a way he couldn't fully explain. His professional experience had taught him to trust his instincts, and every instinct was telling him that something was very wrong. The final incident of the day occurred just as William was preparing to leave Thames House. He had completed his afternoon documentation and was packing his equipment when Sarah Collins approached him with an unusual request. She asked if he could return the following morning to conduct an additional review of the building's perimeter security. The request itself wasn't unusual, but her manner was. She seemed nervous, almost apologetic, as if she was asking him to do something she didn't want to ask. As William left Thames House that evening, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had fundamentally changed during those few seconds of eye contact with the mysterious visitor. He had no way of knowing that his instincts were correct, or that by tomorrow morning he would be the most hunted man in London. The rain that had been threatening all day finally began to fall as William walked to the tube station. Behind him, Thames House stood like a silent monument to secrets, its windows glowing with the warm light of people working late into the evening. Inside that building, decisions were being made that would soon turn William's quiet, ordinary life into something extraordinary and dangerous. He had no idea that the man whose eyes had met his across that corridor was about to become the most wanted person in the intelligence community, or that their brief moment of recognition had just triggered a sequence of events that would expose one of the most closely guarded secrets in modern espionage history. The next morning brought an unseasonable chill to London. William arrived at Thames House to find the building transformed once again, but this time the change was subtle and infinitely more unsettling. Where yesterday had been filled with tension and heightened security, today carried an atmosphere of forced normalcy that felt like a carefully constructed lie. Sarah Collins met him at the main entrance with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her greeting was professional but distant, as if she was speaking to a stranger rather than someone she had worked with for weeks. As she handed him his daily access badge, William noticed her hands trembling slightly, a detail that his trained eye caught immediately. The perimeter security review she had requested turned out to be far more extensive than William had anticipated. Rather than the focused assessment he had expected, Sarah presented him with a comprehensive checklist that would require him to examine every external access point, camera position, and potential vulnerability around the entire Thames House complex. What made this particularly unusual was the level of detail required. Sarah explained that the review needed to be completed by the end of the day, and that his findings would need to be documented with unprecedented thoroughness. Every observation, every recommendation, every minor detail needed to be recorded and verified. As William began his external walkthrough, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. It wasn't the routine observation that came with working in a high-security environment. This felt different, more focused, as if someone was studying his every move with intense interest. The first sign that something was seriously wrong came when William attempted to access his usual review checklist on his tablet. The secure network connection he had been using for weeks was suddenly unavailable. When he mentioned this to Sarah during a mid-morning check-in, she explained that there had been routine system upgrades overnight that might have affected external contractor access. But William's technical background told him this explanation didn't make sense. Security system upgrades at facilities like Thames House were never routine, and they certainly weren't implemented overnight without extensive planning and notification. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that his network access had been deliberately terminated. It was during his lunch break that William made the discovery that would change everything. He was examining the building's eastern perimeter when he decided to cross-reference his current observations with photos he had taken during his previous weeks of work. As he scrolled through his tablet's photo library, he found something that made his blood run cold. 3 days earlier, he had taken a wide-angle photograph of the fourth-floor corridor to document camera placement. The image was clear and detailed, showing the hallway from multiple angles. But what caught his attention wasn't the security equipment he had intended to photograph. In the background of the image, clearly visible through the glass partition of the rarely used conference room, were two figures in conversation. William zoomed in on the image, his heart racing as the details became clearer. One of the figures was unmistakably the mysterious visitor from yesterday, the man whose brief eye contact had filled him with such unease. But the other figure was someone William recognized immediately, someone whose face was familiar to anyone who followed British politics and intelligence matters. It was Dame Margaret Thornfield, the Director General of MI5, one of the most powerful people in British intelligence, a woman whose very presence in a room indicated matters of national security at the highest level. And she was deep in conversation with a man who, according to yesterday's official schedule, had never been in the building at all. William stared at the photograph for several minutes, trying to process what he was seeing. The conversation between Dame Margaret and the unknown visitor appeared intense, almost confrontational. Their body language suggested disagreement, possibly even argument. This wasn't the collegial discussion one might expect between allies, but something far more serious. But what made the image truly extraordinary was what William could see in the background. The conference room's walls were covered with what appeared to be classified documents, photographs, and diagrams. Even at the resolution of his tablet camera, he could make out enough detail to understand that this was no routine intelligence briefing. The materials displayed suggested an operation of massive scope and international significance. As William continued to study the photograph, he began to notice other details that added layers of complexity to what he was witnessing. On the conference table were several red folders, the kind used for the most highly classified intelligence materials. Multiple communication devices were visible, including what appeared to be secure satellite phones and encrypted computers. Most disturbing of all were the maps. Large-scale charts were spread across one end of the table, and even through the distant photograph, William could make out what appeared to be operational planning materials. Routes marked in red, timing charts, and what looked like personnel assignments were clearly visible. The more William examined the image, the more convinced he became that he had accidentally documented something that was never supposed to be recorded. A meeting that, according to all official records, had never taken place between people who, officially, had never met. His hands shaking slightly, William saved the photograph to a secure folder on his tablet and continued with his external perimeter review. But his mind was racing, trying to piece together the implications of what he had discovered. If this meeting was so sensitive that it required the extraordinary security measures he had witnessed yesterday, why wasn't it documented in any official capacity? And if it was legitimately authorized, why did he feel like he was in danger simply for having accidentally photographed it? The afternoon brought new complications. As William worked his way around the building's perimeter, he began to notice surveillance that had nothing to do with the building's normal security protocols. A black sedan with tinted windows had been parked across the street when he began his morning review. 6 hours later, it was still there, though the occupants had changed twice during his observation. More subtly, William noticed pedestrians who seemed to take unusual interest in his activities. People who lingered too long in his vicinity, who changed direction when he changed direction, who seemed to be coordinating their movements with others in the area. His professional training in surveillance detection was screaming warnings that he was being watched by a coordinated team. By late afternoon, William had completed his perimeter review and was preparing to compile his final report. But as he sat in the small office space Sarah had provided, trying to focus on his documentation, he found himself constantly returning to the photograph on his tablet. The more he studied it, the more questions arose about what he had accidentally captured. Using his security consultant's database access, William began researching the unknown visitor from the photograph. His facial recognition software, designed for security applications, returned no matches in any public database. This was unusual, but not unprecedented for someone involved in intelligence work. But what was unprecedented was what happened when he tried to cross-reference the man's appearance with classified intelligence personnel databases that his security clearance allowed him to access. The system returned an error message William had never seen before. Not a simple access denied or no matches found, but a complex warning about attempting to access information above his authorization level. The implication was clear. The man in the photograph existed in databases so highly classified that even William's extensive security clearance wasn't sufficient to access them. This discovery sent a chill through William that had nothing to do with London's unseasonable weather. In 15 years of security consulting, including work with multiple intelligence agencies, he had never encountered information classified at such a high level. Whoever the mysterious visitor was, he operated in circles of secrecy that were beyond anything William had previously encountered. As the day drew to a close, Sarah Collins arrived to collect William's final report. Her manner had grown increasingly nervous throughout the day, and now she seemed barely able to maintain her professional composure. As she reviewed his documentation, William noticed that she paid particular attention to any sections that mentioned the fourth-floor corridor or the conference room where yesterday's mysterious meeting had taken place. William made a decision that would prove crucial to everything that followed. Rather than mentioning the photograph he had discovered, he submitted his report without any reference to the meeting he had witnessed or the extraordinary security measures he had observed. Some instinct told him that revealing what he had seen would put him in immediate danger. But Sarah's behavior suggested that his caution might already be too late. As she prepared to leave with his report, she paused at the door and turned back to him with an expression of genuine concern. "William," she said quietly, "I want you to know that your work here has been exemplary. Your professionalism and discretion have been noted at the highest levels." The emphasis she placed on the word discretion was unmistakable. She was sending him a message, a warning disguised as praise. She was telling him that powerful people were aware of his presence in the building, and that his continued well-being depended on keeping quiet about whatever he might have observed. As William left Tim's house that evening, he felt the weight of the photograph on his tablet like a physical burden. He had accidentally stumbled into the middle of something that operated far above his security clearance, something that involved people powerful enough to make problems disappear permanently. The black sedan was still across the street as he walked to the tube station. This time, William got a clear look at one of the occupants as they changed shifts. The man was young, fit, and moved with the fluid precision of someone trained in surveillance and worse. When their eyes met briefly through the car's windshield, William saw the same cold assessment he had witnessed in the mysterious visitor's gaze the day before. On the train ride home, William made another crucial decision. Rather than simply storing the photograph on his tablet, he uploaded it to multiple secure cloud storage accounts and sent encrypted copies to several trusted colleagues in the security industry. He told himself it was just a precaution, insurance against the loss of important documentation. But deep down, he knew it was something else entirely. It was insurance against disappearing altogether. As the train pulled into his station, William caught a glimpse of his reflection in the window. The ordinary man who had walked into Tim's house 3 weeks earlier was gone. In his place was someone who possessed knowledge that governments killed to protect, someone who had accidentally become one of the most dangerous men in London. Tomorrow, he would learn just how dangerous that knowledge could be. William woke at 3 in the morning to the sound of his security system's silent alarm. Years of working in high-risk environments had trained him to wake instantly at the first sign of potential danger, and the barely audible beeping from his bedside monitor sent adrenaline flooding through his system immediately. He lay perfectly still for several seconds, listening to the sounds of his London flat. Everything seemed normal, but the security system didn't lie. Something had triggered the motion sensors in his building's stairwell, and the pattern of alerts suggested someone was making a careful, deliberate approach to his third-floor apartment. Moving with the silent efficiency he had learned during his military service years earlier, William slipped from his bed and crossed to the window. The street below appeared normal for 3 o'clock on a Wednesday morning, but William's trained eye caught details that would have escaped most observers. 2 cars were parked in positions that provided clear sight lines to his building's entrance. Both vehicles were occupied, though the occupants were doing their best to remain invisible. More telling was what was missing from the scene. Mrs. Patterson from the flat below was a chronic insomniac who typically spent her sleepless nights reading by her front window. Her window was dark tonight, unusual enough to be noteworthy. The teenage son of the family across the street was supposed to be returning from his job at a late-night restaurant. His motorcycle wasn't in its usual spot. The absence of normal nighttime activity suggested that someone had taken steps to clear the area around his building. That kind of systematic preparation spoke to resources and authority far beyond what typical criminals could marshal. This was the work of professionals, and William was fairly certain he knew who had sent them. The motion sensors continued their quiet alerts, indicating that whoever was in the stairwell was taking their time, probably conducting their own surveillance before making their final approach. This gave William a few precious minutes to implement the emergency protocols he had hoped never to use. Moving to his study, William activated his computer and began uploading the remaining files from his Thames House assignment to multiple secure servers. The photograph of the mysterious meeting was already safely distributed, but there were other documents, observations, and notes that might prove crucial if something happened to him tonight. As he worked, William's mind raced through the events of the past 2 days, trying to understand how his situation had deteriorated so quickly. The photograph had clearly triggered something, but he hadn't shared it with anyone or attempted to identify the people involved through official channels. So how had they known he possessed it? The answer came to him with chilling clarity as he remembered the unusual thoroughness of yesterday's perimeter review. Sarah Collins hadn't been trying to keep him busy or gather additional security information. She had been buying time for technical specialists to examine his equipment to discover what he might have accidentally captured during his weeks at Thames House. The final motion sensor alert indicated that someone had reached his floor. William saved the last of his files, encrypted his hard drive, and moved to the position he had selected months earlier when he first established his emergency procedures. From the narrow alcove between his kitchen and living room, he had a clear view of both his front door and the fire escape window while remaining invisible to anyone entering the apartment. The attack, when it came, was executed with professional precision. No dramatic breaking down of doors or shouted commands. Instead, William heard the barely audible scratch of professional lockpicks working on his front door security system. Whoever was coming for him had the tools and expertise to defeat locks that would have stopped ordinary criminals for hours. The door opened silently, and 3 figures entered his apartment. They moved with the coordinated efficiency of a team that had worked together many times before, spreading out to cover all possible escape routes while conducting a systematic search. They wore dark clothing and carried equipment that suggested they were prepared for surveillance, capture, or worse. From his concealed position, William watched them work. Their search was methodical and thorough, but they were clearly looking for something specific. They spent considerable time examining his computer equipment, his tablet, and any storage devices they could find. When they didn't immediately find what they were looking for, their search became more intensive. One of the intruders, apparently the team leader, spoke quietly into a secure communication device. William couldn't make out the words, but the tone suggested frustration. They had expected to find something that wasn't where they thought it would be. It was then that William realized his precautions from the previous evening might have saved his life. By distributing copies of the crucial photograph and uploading his files to remote servers, he had made it impossible for these professionals to simply eliminate him and destroy the evidence. Even if they captured him tonight, the information would still exist beyond their reach. The team's search continued for another 20 minutes before they apparently received new instructions through their communication devices. Their body language changed, becoming more urgent and aggressive. Whatever orders they had received, William was certain they didn't bode well for his continued health. As the team prepared to leave, William faced a crucial decision. He could remain hidden and hope they would simply give up their search, or he could take the initiative while he still had the element of surprise. His military training and years of security work had taught him that waiting for the enemy to choose the terms of engagement was usually a losing strategy. Moving with careful precision, William retrieved the emergency kit he kept hidden in his kitchen. Along with cash, false identification documents, and communication equipment, the kit contained items that would prove essential for what came next. Most importantly, it contained a secure satellite phone that operated through channels his pursuers couldn't monitor or intercept. As the team of intruders finally left his apartment, William waited exactly 15 minutes before making his own exit through the fire escape window. His emergency procedures called for him to assume his apartment was under surveillance and to avoid using any predictable escape routes. The fire escape led to an adjoining building where he had previously arranged alternative exit options. From the roof of the neighboring building, William could see the street around his apartment building clearly. His assessment had been correct. At least 6 vehicles were positioned to monitor all possible exits from his building. The team that had searched his apartment was part of a much larger operation designed to capture him the moment he appeared. But William had spent years thinking about scenarios exactly like this one. His emergency escape route led through a series of connected buildings, down through a basement access tunnel that connected to London's extensive underground utility network. From there, he could reach a safe house he had established as part of his contingency planning. The journey through London's underground took more than 2 hours, but it brought William to a location his pursuers couldn't have anticipated. The safe house was a small flat in East London, rented under an identity that existed only in the most secure databases. Even if his pursuers had access to intelligence resources, it would take them time to connect this location to his activities. Once secure in the safe house, William activated his satellite phone and made the call that would change everything. The number belonged to James Morrison, an investigative journalist specializing in intelligence matters whom William had worked with on several previous occasions. Morrison had the contacts, resources, and, most importantly, the credibility to take William's story to people who could act on it. Morrison answered on the second ring, immediately recognizing the secure line William was using. Years of working with intelligence sources had taught him that calls on this line usually meant someone was in serious danger. William's explanation was concise and urgent. He described the meeting he had witnessed at Tim's house, the photograph he had accidentally captured, and the events of the past 2 days that had culminated in the search of his apartment. As he spoke, he transmitted encrypted copies of the photograph and supporting documentation to Morrison's secure servers. Morrison's response confirmed William's worst fears. The journalist immediately recognized the significance of what William had stumbled into. The mysterious visitor in the photograph was someone Morrison had been investigating for months, a man connected to some of the most controversial intelligence operations of the past decade. More disturbing still was Morrison's information about recent events in the intelligence community. 3 people connected to the same operations had died under suspicious circumstances within the past month. All had been classified as accidents or natural causes, but Morrison's sources suggested something far more sinister was taking place. William's accidental photograph had provided the first concrete evidence of connections that Morrison had been trying to prove for years. But it had also made William the most dangerous person in London from the perspective of people who would kill to keep those connections secret. As dawn broke over London, William faced the reality of his situation. he could never return to his normal life. The people hunting him had resources that spanned multiple intelligence agencies and possibly several governments. His only chance for survival lay in exposing the truth before they could silence him permanently. Morrison arranged to meet William at a location known to be secure from surveillance, a small cafe in Camden that the journalist had used for sensitive meetings in the past. But as William prepared to leave the safe house, his secure phone received a message that changed everything. The message came from Sarah Collins, sent through channels that suggested she was no longer at Tim's house, and possibly in as much danger as William himself. Her words were brief, but chilling. The meeting you photographed never happened. The people involved never met. You never worked at Tim's house. They're rewriting history, and anyone who knows the truth is being eliminated. Trust no one in official positions. The conspiracy goes higher than you can imagine. William stared at the message for several minutes, understanding that his situation had just become exponentially more dangerous. If Sarah was right, then the people hunting him weren't just trying to recover classified information. They were conducting a systematic elimination of everyone who could expose a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. But they had made one crucial mistake. By waiting until William had already distributed the evidence, they had ensured that silencing him would no longer be sufficient to protect their secrets. The photograph and supporting documentation were already in the hands of people who could expose the truth, regardless of what happened to William. As he left the safe house and made his way toward the meeting with Morrison, William realized that he was no longer just running for his life. He had become the key witness in a story that could topple governments and expose corruption at the highest levels of international intelligence. The ordinary security consultant who had walked into Tim's house 3 weeks earlier was gone forever. In his place was a man carrying evidence that could reshape the modern intelligence landscape, assuming he could survive long enough to tell his story to the world.